Here we are one more time again. This is the second episode, or whatever it is you want to call it. I don't really care. I like labels for organizational purposes and a little bit of reference, but I really don't like it because it's kind of limiting in a lot of areas. So call it what you want. But this is the second conversation, I suppose. And I'm going to call it something to the effect of I guess a collection of events, a personal history, versus or tied in with your immediate changeable reality, or in other words, perception of reality. I've been doing a lot of what do you want to call it? Introspection, self-reflecting. I've had to through the years, or I felt like I had to. But I have come to the understanding, or a portion of what I think an understanding is. A lot of times we are defined by our actions from the past. We are defined by our events from the past. And that has a tendency to push us in a particular direction. I think that some other people call it inertia. But there's definitely momentum involved. You know, once you have made or internalized certain aspects of your history, and it has become part of your habits, your daily life, your yearly life, it certainly has a tendency to limit your possibilities. And that can go on all sorts of things. I'm not saying that somebody would want to, but say your history was pretty good, or even if it was pretty bad, and you found a way to overcome some pretty negative obstacles to the point where your present is actually really, really good. You really feel like you have your life together, and you're very content and peaceable with that, and at the same time still growing and moving forward in the areas that you choose, not ones that you feel like you're forced into. The chances that you would experience the situation of perhaps having a child that isn't the person that you're with, like say you cheat and you end up having a kid that doesn't belong and isn't genetically related to your husband, or perhaps you're a person that has never had to live on the streets, been homeless with an addiction of some sort. There's an awful lot of situations that you would never experience most often because it never came across your path as a child. It never came across your path in your past. It just wasn't on the radar. It wasn't something that you would even envision or think was possible. Most of the time, that's how things go. Now, that's a situation taking it from good to bad, or from more optimal, more healthy to more unhealthy. Now, oftentimes it's the other way around. The way that we try to deal with life is we didn't come, some of us anyway, didn't come from very positive situations, and everybody has had some extremely negative situations impact how they went through life, and some issues that they may have had along the way. And if we have a tendency to, and as humans we do, but if we have a tendency to project our limitations or our own belief structures or ideals, or how we would go about navigating life, a lot of times that's fairly dependent upon where we came from and what we did, unless, of course, something intervened along the way, or we happen to be extremely unique and we step aside from that. So one of the reasons that I'm doing this and having these conversations is because I come from one of those types of backgrounds where there was an awful lot of not positive things around, what a lot of people would consider extremely detrimental. What one of my closer friends constantly asks me is, how how are you not a serial killer? And with some pretty good logical reason behind it. And a lot of that had to do with, the way that I chose to react to my past. And I've also come across the understanding that at any given point in time when I made choices to step away from the more negative aspects of my life path or my life pattern, it was a choice. It was an obsessive decision of sorts. And certain parts of my life, not all of them, it's a work. It definitely is. But it doesn't have to be as hard as what I think people make it out to be. It's as though you make a decision, and all the stuff, that was, whether you created it for yourself or whether it was brought on by external situations that you didn't have any control over and couldn't have had any influence over. The issue is you make a choice, and it's as though that stuff never, ever happened. Because from that choice forward, got the hiccups. From that choice forward, you're moving forward towards, you're moving completely away from whatever that pattern had been and into something completely new, into a completely different growth area. And you may know where that path goes because you may have seen other people do it, or maybe you've got people that are there to cheer you on, help you out. Support groups are huge. That's something I've just heard recently, and maybe other people have heard it before, is some stuff that Les Brown had talked about. And one of his rules, basically, or principles, is OQP, and that's only quality people. Don't have negative people around you. If you are moving forward in any area of your life, but it's a definite improvement for you, an absolute improvement, and it's not, I think one of the better rules I've heard, or better principles I've heard, is, don't hesitate to go get your own good as long as it's not taking away any good from anyone else, and that's true. There's times when we need to make changes in life that other people aren't going to be comfortable with, because maybe they got comfortable with some things, overly comfortable, or maybe they've used, your presence in their life as a crutch to make themselves feel more complete when they should have been working on themselves to be complete so that they can truly add to someone else's life and also truly receive without having to put, like limitations or rules or principles. I don't know. It's a very convoluted situation. Well, not even convoluted. It's complex to a point. But at the same time, I also believe people have a tendency to make things a lot more complex than what they need to be. But anyway, the whole point is coming to an understanding of realizing that when you choose to step out of something, whatever it is, a negative situation, whatever that may be, it doesn't make any difference. When you no longer are allowing your past to dictate how you navigate your present, as though literally you pretend like it does not exist, like it never existed. It was never part of your process, because moving forward and truly embracing your own self and your own responsibility for yourself, taking complete responsibility for yourself, regardless of if the mistakes were yours or if they were someone else's. You can't change other people. You can only change yourself. And that's pretty powerful. So it's interesting to see that balance between the acceptance of where we came from and knowing that it has an effect, or at least had an effect, and then understanding that when it comes down to it, when you make a choice to do something completely different, in a positive way, or even in a negative way, it doesn't make it's as though all that stuff didn't make any difference to begin with. And so a lot of the stuff that we lug around and we carry, in ourselves, whether it be guilt or whether it be anger or, a whole bunch of different destructive things, remorse, regret, et cetera, et cetera. I wish I could have been this, or, whatever. Just drop it, and it doesn't mean that, I think one of the things that happens, I know one thing that happened with me and still happens, it's a knee-jerk reaction in me, where if someone approaches me with that same attitude, I have a tendency to jump to the idea or the embrace the idea or project the idea that they're telling me to, get over it, or even me telling me to get over it means I'm supposed to somehow self-erase. Like that's part of who I am. And they need to acknowledge that, whatever that negative thing had been or where I came from, and until they truly understand or whatever, or just acknowledge that it's there. And there's a certain comfort in that, but it's like a comfortable pain. It's like saying, hey, you know what, I'm special because of what I've been through. And honestly, and this is just kind of hitting me right now, but anytime that we want recognition for something that we didn't do ourselves, that somebody else did to us, because that's basically what it is. It's like, well, I need you to understand where I came from. That type of stuff. It's kind of like, okay, so, literally, so no one's going to ever be able to completely understand what you've been through. And most people, quite honestly, even as much as I think a lot of people are kind of dumb, most people don't want to see other people in pain when it gets right down to it. And so expecting people to understand what you've been through when they're not the ones that did it to you to begin with, and for the most part, they just want to live their own lives and see you happy along the way, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference, because the only people that can do anything about it is yourself and not anyone else. So, I kind of to wrap this up, because I don't want these things to have to go too long, I realize that, I've got a limited, what do you want to call it, attention span. I get to the shiny object syndrome pretty bad a lot of times. But to get to a spot where you just take a look and say, okay, what was, is exactly that. It was. We are constantly in a state of change. And whether even if our external situations don't change, if we ourselves, as much as possible, stay on a continuous day-to-day, rigorous, life of repetition, we are still changing because we are getting older. And either our minds are going to become less flexible and more inflexible in those ways, or they're going to become, through training, through whatever, more adaptable. But to think that, what a person's past has to dictate their future, I think probably one of the most interesting and glaringly obvious ways that overthrows that whole idea is, and I've seen it recently with a few acquaintances, people who've made some massive changes in their physical appearance due to weight loss and how that happened. They had been, fairly large for decades, just really. And then somewhere along the line, one day they made a decision that says, this isn't me anymore. That was the old me. Now, all the reasons that they overate or comfort ate or whatever the situations are, they just don't use those reasons for their existence any longer. They made a choice and they stuck with it, and they changed. And I don't think that they could unstuck with it. I think they'd have to, they could take a look and say, okay, the habits that they used to have, I'm sure they could, reintroduce them into their lives, but then they would be some of the same things that they used to be, just older, so it's still going to be different. But in a short period of time, especially by way of comparison to how long they stayed the way they had been with lesser optimum health at a higher weight, they, in a short period of time, changed massively. And in part of that change also came a change in their opportunities, in their outlooks. And some people might say, well, that's just because they got thinner and other people are responding to that. And it's like, no, actually it's not. It has to do with the fact that they made a change. So not only are they interacting with their own life differently, but because of that, they're interacting with all parts of life differently. Because what once had been a certain way, they made it a completely different way. And it really goes to show, in obviously a physical and a mental way, but primarily in those ways physical, that all the stuff that you've been through, when you make a decision to go in a particular direction, no matter what it might be, anything that you did up to that point doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean a damn thing. Because, I mean, as far you may have learned certain things, et cetera, but where you're headed, it most often has nothing to do with where you came from, unless all you're doing is living in reaction and reliving what your past was, why it is the way it was, who did it to you, and what that's going to do is lock you into a cycle of comfortable pain, really, and comfortable disappointment. So in essence, it's kind of that thing of saying, hey, you know what? Your past does have, an influence, and it literally could dictate everything you do from, the point of being, an adult on forward. Inversely, at any given point in time, you have the power to say, hey, I want to be something else. I want to be something else. So how does that happen? And then your brain, rather than fixating, ask questions. One of the best things you could do to your brain is tax it with questions. Say, okay, if I want to be something else, if I don't want to be this anymore, no matter what it is, whether it's what you do for work or whether it's what you don't do for play or whatever the situation is, or relationships, whatever. If it's just a situation is I don't want this, okay, well, not wanting something is completely different than choosing something and wanting it, setting a goal and saying, that is what I want. Because now you get a whole new way to look at things, and you start a process of exploration of what could be instead of what is and what has been. So it's interesting. It's like it's a breaking away from the absolute realities of the objective physical, of just saying, yes, this is your history, this is the life you had, these are the things that happened. You can't negate all those things that happened. They definitely happened. If you got in a car accident, a person can't come around a day later and says, well, looks like you never got in a car accident. No, that's retarded. That's just stupid. That would be retarded. Yes, I use the word retarded. Nah. So at the same time, a person can look at it and be like, yeah, that was part of my past, but I'm not living as though I was in a car accident. Even if there were some situations or some physical ailments that came from it, it doesn't mean that you have to keep reliving the accident over and over and over and over and over again and be like, well, I can't do all sorts of different things because of the accident. Well, what you could do is take a look at, well, what can you do? I mean, and maybe it was just a minor fender bender. Doesn't really, at that point in time, you're still free to do whatever you'd want to anyway. But it's just like I say, I think it's interesting the power that the human has to be able to say, I'm done with something because I'm choosing to go do something else, and how much of a change that can have. And I see it in people all the time, the amount of change it does have. So I guess the whole point to it, if there's any moral to this rambling, is find something you want. Find something you want. Write it down. Find something that, whether it's an object or a lifestyle or a skill or the ability to paint something or whatever, or to sing a song. I don't really care what it is. It doesn't make any difference. Just something that you want in your life that maybe, and most likely, that you've probably said, I don't really think I could ever do that. Or that's just not me, or whatever, but I'd like it. It'd be kind of fun and cool, or whatever the situation is. Write it down. Start putting stick-em notes up in front of your face. It's amazing. I heard one time somebody say something to the effect of the ability to spell. People couldn't read and write for most of throughout history. A lot of people didn't have that skill. They weren't taught. They were not, taught how to read and write. They were fairly illiterate societies. And the concept of casting a spell was the ability to write something down and repetitiously say it again and again and again. And it is something that we find, this is even how we learn speech as children. It's because certain words, certain things, phrases, are repeated constantly to us when our parents talk to us. And they point at objects, or when you pick something up, they ball, it's ball, and finally you're like, ball, okay, so you relate that. That's that whole concept of casting a spell. It's a situation that says, hey, I'm spelling this out, I'm relaying this information, and I'm going to repeat it. That is one way that we can affect our subconscious mind and reprogram things, is repetition, repetition, repetition. We get muscle memory because of repetition. It's been proven in gyms too, power lifters and bodybuilders and stuff. They have muscle memory. If you quit working out for a few years and you lose a lot of the strength, you come back to it, and you come back to it with the same tenacity. It takes you a severely shorter time to get back to the strength levels than it initially did to get there to begin with, because your muscles remember. They have that repetitive memory in them, implanted in them. They've been programmed. Well, something I've had to accept, whether I like it or not, is as the physical is, so is the mental. And some people bring that into the spiritual too, if all three of them are tied together, et cetera, et cetera. Not going to get hugely into that right offhand, but I've seen it, experienced it, and it seems to make a lot of sense in a lot of areas. So, but just kind of going down that road of saying, the experiential, the things that we experienced, even though they are real and they were tangible at the time, some of them being fairly traumatic, it is really interesting that it doesn't have to have any effect at all when we make a decision and obsess over it and choose a different way. So that's it. It's a massive power choice. So enjoy, go out there, make some choices, see what happens. Some of them could be pretty massive, and don't ever sell yourself short. I think a lot of people can do a hell of a lot more than what they believe they can themselves. Life is and can be, and depending on how you're looking at it, it can be a real beautiful thing. Pretty cool. So anyway, have a great day. Keep in mind, KnowRevolution.com. Things are going to be coming up there on the website fairly soon. And have a good day. See ya. Bye.